lovely people in here. So I'm going to wait for that to happen.
We're live.
Wonderful. So hello, humans, and welcome to the Humanist Society of a Greater Phoenix Sunday speaker event. Please hit the like button and subscribe to get more of our awesome content, or better yet, become a member of HSGP and volunteer for something that fills you with joy. Today, we have the Sunday speaker, Heather Macre, CAP, meeting the challenges to AZ's water supply. Heather Macre was elected to her first term on the CAWCD Board of Directors on November 6, 2012, to represent Maricopa County. She was re-elected in 2018 and will serve until 2024. Ms. Macre is a director at Fenmore Law, where she practices commercial litigation and healthcare law. She earned a BA from University of Florida and a law degree from University of Florida Levin College of Law. Ms. Macre is a member of the Phoenix Suns Charities, SC 88, Charter 100, and she is a delegate to the British American Project. Ms. Macre is married to Stephen Kruczek, my apologies, and has one daughter, Dorothy. Ms. Macre enjoys reading, Peloton, and spending time with her 4 rescue dogs. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our lovely Sunday speaker.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm very excited to be here. Again, I should say, I've spoken to the Humanist Society a few times, and it's always wonderful. I even remember a couple years ago, I did one of the book clubs on a Jeff Fleck book about water. And I remember it very specifically because we were at Changing Hands, and my daughter, I think, was 3 or 4 at the time, Dorothy. And my plan was to have her in other parts of the bookstore. And she was like up against the window of the little room that we were in. And so I ended up just bringing her in, and everyone was so kind and wonderful of allowing me to lead the book group with Dorothy on my lap. So it was particularly memorable to me, quite frankly, because not only was it really fun, but it was such an incredible kindness that all of the Humanist Society extended to me and my family. So very excited to be back. I've got some slides for you, so I'm going to turn this over to share screen. I'm going to go through the slides, talk a little bit about some background about the Central Arizona Project, what it is, what it does, and then obviously some of the challenges facing us. I'm going to ask you, just because I'm sharing screen, to hold questions to the end of the presentation if you can. The reason is because when I've got the share screen on, I can't always see everything quite as clearly. So that would be great, but we're definitely going to have some time for questions at the very end, and I'm going to get this started. All right, can you guys all see the slides? Just give me a thumbs up. Perfect, thank you. So obviously I'm here today. I am Heather Macre. I'm a member of the CAWCD, or the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board. We are a board of 15 directors, and we oversee and set policy for the Central Arizona Project canals. And you can see one of those canals in this photo. Oh, why are we not? There we go. Sorry about that. So this is a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Like I said, we're going to start with some background, some information on the economic impact of CAP. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Colorado River system, because it is important to have some understanding of how the system is interconnected and how it's operated. And then we'll talk specifically about the shortage declaration this year and what's next. So what is the Central Arizona Project? It is a 336-mile long aqueduct. It stretches from Lake Havasu to our terminus, which is just south of Tucson. This is one of the manners in which Arizona gets and moves its allotment of Colorado River water. We move about this year, not as much because we are in shortage, but we typically move about 1.5 million acre feet of water through those canals. To give you an idea of how much that is, 1 acre foot of water is enough to cover a football field with 1 foot depth. So we're moving 1.5 million of those on an annual basis. We serve 3 counties, as you can see here. We serve Maricopa County, Pinal County, and Pima County. You kind of see in the little inset map, there's our yellow area, that's our service area. The 336 miles includes 14 pumping plants. Those lift the water about 3,000 feet. We do use gravity flow in some parts of the canal system, but because of Arizona's topography, that doesn't work everywhere. So we actually have pumping plants to lift the water so that we can get it throughout our service area. We also have 10 siphons and 4 tunnels, and our system includes Lake Pleasant, the new Waddell Dam, and the Waddell Pump Generating Plant, which is a hydroelectric plant. Deliveries began in 1985. Those 1985 deliveries were principally in Maricopa County, and construction was complete with that terminus in Tucson in 1993. So Tucson's sort of the end of our system, and it was the latest in terms of deliveries. So again, our service county is 3 counties. That's about 24,000 square miles. As you know, you live here. It's a very arid area. We get less than 8 inches of annual rainfall. We serve about 5 million people, though, in those 3 counties. So approximately 80% of Arizona's population lives within our CAP service territory. So it's an incredibly important function for Arizona. Arizona, for many years, frankly, going back to the 1920s, had an allotment of Colorado River water, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, but the CAP was really its way to move that water. Our intake is off of Lake Havasu, and through the canal system, we can actually move it from Lake Havasu into central and southern Arizona, where we have more population density. So our water usage in 2022, and this tends to surprise people, and some of this, quite frankly, is because A, this is only dealing with cap water, and B, we've made so many cuts to the agricultural system due to the shortage that we are in now. But our current water usage, about 61%, is going to our municipal and industrial clients. So cities, towns, you're probably, if you live in Maricopa County, you're probably drinking cap water or using it in your business. About 35% goes to our local tribal communities, and 4% goes to agriculture. If I had given this presentation 20 years ago, that would be closer to about 50% going to agriculture. But we've seen agriculture using less and less. We've also seen the prices of CAP water go up. And then now, because of our shortage cutbacks, we're only giving about 44%, to agriculture. Though even a few years ago, before we entered shortage, that agriculture number was still hovering around the 35% mark. So I think there's a lot of information out there that says that huge amounts of water are going to agriculture, and there are still significant amounts of water going to agriculture, but it has been cut back significantly in the more recent past. The 35% for our tribal contracts is something that I want to talk about because it's a really unique feature of our system. Essentially, Native American communities are sovereign nations. And so when they need to get their water rights, they actually have to go to Congress and interact with the federal government to get their water allotment. But once they have that allotment, either through a treaty or a minute or something like that, because they are very much treated almost as if they were a sovereign foreign government, they actually have to get a way to get that water, right? Like getting water on paper is not the same as actually being able to pull that water and use it. So what we do with the CAP is about a third of the water in our canal system is going to meet those negotiated treaties. And so we actually have offshoots onto many of our Native American lands. And that is how they actually get their wet water, is through the CAP system. This is very unique. Most water systems are not serving a water mix that includes sovereign nations. We also actually do some water exchanges with Mexico. So we're interacting with Mexico as well. We have a very close relationship with them for obvious reasons, both geographical and political, and then the fact that we all share the river. But Arizona, being right there, has this particularly close relationship with Conagua, which is our Mexican counterpart. So just an interesting aspect of the system. Governance. So this would be me. CAWCD is governed by a 15-member board of directors. Each board member is elected from the 3 county service area, and we have staggered unpaid 6-year terms. Though I will say, if the meeting goes past 2 o'clock, I can order a salad. So, unpaid, but for those Panera salads. Our membership is allotted based on the population of the 3 counties. We have 10 folks from Maricopa County. I am one of them, 4 from Pima County, and 1 from Pinal County. You can see a picture there of our full board. It's a really interesting thing to serve on. I will say, if you live in Maricopa County, which again, I'm assuming most of you do, you will have Central Arizona Project seats on your ballot. There is an election this year. I am not up for re-election for another 2 years, but there is part of our staggered election. There will be some seats on your ballot this year. So don't be surprised if you see that. Start doing your reading. We've got plenty of great candidates running. I'm not going to comment on anyone specifically, but just so you know, it will be on your ballot. You've got until November, but you might want to educate yourself a little bit about who's running and who you might wish to support. And then I always like to talk about this because frankly, it was a really stunning study. We worked with ASU to commission a study to kind of figure out, now that we've had these deliveries since 1993, what has been the economic impact of these deliveries in the state of Arizona? And like I said, we as a board commissioned this study and we're just absolutely stunned by the results. What we found, or what I should say ASU found, is that the Central Arizona Project's delivery of water has contributed $2 trillion in economic benefits since delivery started in 1985. $2 trillion. We support 22 different sectors of the Arizona economy. It's a huge amount. It's about 40% of our gross state product is supported by this water, and it nets out to $100 billion a year. So what we are doing at CAP is very important in terms of supporting our economy here in Arizona. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River Basin and the shortage that we're facing. And again, I want to give you some background because it's hard to understand exactly how we got here without knowing some of the history. And frankly, some of it's pretty interesting. Or at least it's interesting to me, a lawyer who works also for free on a water board. So I realized that my definition of interesting and your definition of interesting could be quite different. So the Colorado River Basin is composed of the upper basin and the lower basin. And as you can see here, there's the upper basin, which is Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and the lower basin, which is predominantly Arizona, California, and Nevada. The upper basin's reservoir is Lake Powell. You can kind of see it on the right side of your screen. And the lower basin's reservoir is Lake Mead. You can see it in that left picture on your screen. The reason that these two reservoirs are so important is because these are the bellwethers for shortage. When we are determining when we are going to be in a time of shortage, it is based on the measurements that are made in these reservoirs. Quite frankly, it would be too much to look at the CAP Canal and the All-American Canal in California and look at Nevada's underground system and figure all that out. So what we do is we use these reservoirs to determine when we are going to be in shortage. And the reservoirs are actually great because they are sort of the sharing points on the river. To give you some background, I'm actually going to go back. The 7 states divided up the river in the 1920s. This was called the Colorado River Compact. And nobody quite knows what happened. If it was just an amazing water river on the year in the 1920s and they just had a bumper crop of water and we've never seen that again, or if perhaps in the 1920s the measurements were not the most accurate. Either of these explanations probably work. But in the 1920s, they determined that there were 7 million acre feet of water in the Colorado River that could be distributed. And it was then subdivided 3.5 million to the upper basin and 3.5 million to the lower basin. So in the lower basin, about 3.5 million acre feet is divided up between Arizona, Nevada, and California. Now, as I said, CAP moves about 1.5 million. That's about half of what the entire allotment is for Arizona. It's a little more than half. But basically, how it was determined that 3.5 million, how it was determined who would get what was based on population and frankly, political power. Arizona in 1920 had just become a state. It was a very young state. And so we didn't have a lot of political power. So we didn't get a lot of Colorado River water. So Arizona's always sort of been on the losing end of that equation. The other reason it's important to talk about this 3.5 million acre feet allocation is that that's a lot of what is driving the shortage today. The river has never produced 7 million acre feet of water to be used by the upper and lower basin. It just does not. And so we have been overdrafting the river really since the 1920s. It's become much more acute since the 1980s because we're seeing more and more states take their full allotment. There were definitely times between the 20s and the 80s where people were not actually taking their full allotment. They couldn't use it. They didn't have, say, the CAP system hadn't been completed. So we're now seeing a lot of stress on the river because we're also using these numbers from the 1920s that just allocate more water than is in the river. And when you add that to climate change, when you add that to population growth, you really see a problem where we just don't have the water to live the lives that we have been living. So I like to talk about that because I think it's important to remember that A, we're dealing with numbers from the 1920s that aren't accurate, and B, we've been overdrafting the river before we even ran into any of the issues that we see now with climate change and things like that. It has been a constant deficit run for a very long time. So, and again, I'm not trying to minimize climate change either, but when you have a system that is already being run in a deficit and then you run into something like that, it becomes a real issue. So what are we doing? As you guys might remember, a few years ago, we were really pushing and passed the DCP, or Drought Contingency Plan. All of the 7 states, and in particular the lower basin, could really see that the way that the river was being operated was going to lead us into shortage and deep shortage very quickly. So a few years ago, and I would say, I think this was signed into law about 3 years ago, we put together the Drought Contingency Plan. Now, the big drought contingency plan is sort of the umbrella plan, and it basically says that the 7 basin states in Mexico that share the river are all going to cut their usage of the river to keep more water in Lake Mead and Lake Powell, respectively. Within that, there are a bunch of what I call the little DCPs, or each state's plan as to how they're going to meet the cuts that they have pledged as part of the larger DCP. This gives you an idea of how the larger DCP is working in the lower basin. And so what we are doing is we are saying that you'll see here a tier 0, and you'll see less than 1,090 feet. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where we take these measurements in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and those determine shortage. So if we take a measurement of the amount of water in Lake Mead, and I will just tell you, this is a top of the water to the bottom of the water measurement in Lake Mead. There is nothing fancy about it. If we have 1,090 feet of water in Lake Mead measured from top to bottom, or less than that, we are in a tier 0. Technically, we should not have any shortage because at 1090 or above, we're in good shape in Lake Mead, but we made the decision as the lower basin that we were going to keep water in Lake Mead. Up until this year, up until 2022, we have been operating for the last few years in this tier 0. And what that means is you'll see the purple dots. That means that Arizona is voluntarily giving up 192,000 acre feet of water in that tier 0 and storing it in Lake Mead. Nevada is storing 8,000 acre feet. Mexico is doing 41,000. The Bureau of Reclamation is doing 100,000. All of us have been voluntarily doing that for the last few years to keep water in Lake Mead, to forestall shortage, and then to sort of make sure that if we do get into shortage, we're in the less severe shortages. On that next one, tier 1, that's what we are in now. That was declared this year based on the measurements in Lake Mead. That means that there is less than 1,075 feet of water in Lake Mead. So you hear 1075 a lot. That's literally just that depth of water in Lake Mead. That's where we are now. Arizona has cut its allotment, you can see the blue dot, by 512,000 acre feet. Most of those cuts have been absorbed by CAP. That's why I was saying we usually have about 1.5 million acre feet of water in the canal. Right now, we're closer to about 1 million to 1.1 million acre feet of water in the canal. And you can see Nevada is also taking cuts in Mexico. If we get to a tier 2, that's less than 1,050 feet in Lake Mead, then you see these even deeper cuts. You see a 592,000 foot cut to Arizona. Arizona's cuts become a little less dramatic going forward since we take that really big cut at the front. That was a strategic decision on our part. We worked with our agricultural partners to kind of determine how we could do this. And the thought was just to do, frankly, rip the Band-Aid, do that really big cut up front. And then you'll see we've got a tier 2B and a tier 3. I will tell you that tier 3 is particularly concerning When we get to that number of less than 1,025 feet of water in Lake Mead, we start to lose the ability to generate power through the Hoover Dam. Now, the CAP, we do have a Hoover Dam power allotment. It's only about 11% of our portfolio, so it's not particularly large for us, but the Hoover Dam powers a huge chunk of homes in Nevada and northern Arizona, so we really do not want to get there. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing the DCP. It is working, though we are still seeing drops, particularly in Lake Powell in the upper basin. They had a much less aggressive panel of cuts, and perhaps they should have had more aggressive cuts, since our DCP seems to be working a little bit better, though they are hydrologically quite distinct. So I want to talk a little bit about how those shortages work specifically in Arizona. I called this sort of our little DCP, or the Arizona DCP. So in a tier 1 shortage, and you've got kind of a little diagram here that shows you what I'm talking about in terms of the Lake Mead surface elevations. You know, in a tier 1 shortage, which is here where we are now, you see that we've essentially wiped out the excess pool. We've reduced agriculture's consumption by about 65%. We do not have reductions to our municipal and industrial customers or to our tribal customers. But I will tell you, if we get to a tier 2, we will start seeing some cuts to those groups. We took the big cut to agriculture, and again, we really did work very directly with our agricultural customers to make sure that A, they knew this was coming, and B, that they were preparing for it. We've done a lot of really interesting programs with them to get them ready. They've been really good partners, quite honestly. So this is a lot of what we've been doing. And of course, if it gets lower, we will start to see reductions to those other groups. So what we're doing next, and frankly, this was just passed in December of this year, and we are still, Arizona's made a lot of progress, but I will say that we are still very much figuring this out. But like I said, even with DCP, we're seeing that Lake Mead and the river are still having shortages, and it's happening faster than we had anticipated. So we created what is called the 500 plus plan. What that means is that the lower basin states are looking to find voluntary, temporary, and compensated conservation uses to save at least another 500,000 acre feet of water in Lake Mead. Arizona's target is about 200,000 acre feet. So somewhere in the neighborhood of a little less than half of that. We are working with our on-river users and our CAP users, which is really interesting. Our on-river users have grandfathered rights, and so we do not typically see them take cuts. They don't have to. They are operating under a very different set of guidelines, and yet we are seeing them actually take some pretty significant cuts to contribute to this plan. The plan includes both tribal and non-tribal participants. The GRIC, the Gila River Indian Community, and the Act-Chin are both huge participants. Like I said, about 30,000 acre feet are coming from our on-river users, not something we've seen before. It is not a large number, but frankly, we are looking to grow that number, and it is a much larger number than 0, which is what we've seen in the past. We're also getting 193,000 acre feet from CAP users. Again, a lot of these are our tribal customers. They are excellent partners. All of these contributions are going to benefit Lake Mead, and all of them will be funded through CAP and ADWR, hoping that these will be voluntary, temporary, and of course, compensated. So what's next? You know, what is the answer, because there is no one answer, but sort of what's next for Arizona's water supply? Well, we're working really hard to build a resilient Colorado River system. We are going back right now and working through new guidelines to run the river. That's both with the 7 basin states as well as with the Bureau of Reclamation, and of course within our lower basin. So we're reconsulting on those. That has already started. We have the ARC, the Arizona Reconsultation Committee. That's been meeting. Those meetings are open to the public. So if you have any interest in them, at the end, we'll go over some resources. And if you want to attend those meetings, they're mostly happening on Zoom still, just to be honest. I think they will start going in person soon. But like you guys, we are still trying to decide when we're comfortable going in person. So right now we are doing these meetings on Zoom, but they're absolutely open to the public. And there's absolutely opportunities to give public comment. We also have an electronic blue card system, sort of like they do at the legislature. So if you want to launch a comment and you can't be there, we can absolutely show you how to use that. It's a really great system, super easy. I personally love it. And we're also looking at augmentation, conservation, reuse, and recovery. We've been working quite a bit. Lately, we've worked with agriculture quite a bit. One of the cool projects we've been doing recently with them is called an end drip system. It's a technology that a few of us, including myself, found on visits to Israel. And essentially, it is a new kind of drip irrigation. Instead of using lines, it uses a mesh. So it actually creates more crop using even less water than drip irrigation. We've been doing some really exciting pilot projects on that and getting great results and helping our farmers pay for it. It's very expensive, but we're helping them pay for it, offsetting it. They're getting less water now and being able to do more with it. So stuff like that's been really exciting. We're working really closely with our cities. A lot of cities, Scottsdale, Glendale, are actually reusing almost 100% right now. They're actually recycling most of their water. And we're also looking at augmentation. We're working with Mexico on some pilot projects looking at desalination. So a lot of exciting stuff happening, a lot of new technology being developed. At CAP, partnering with ADWR as well as the feds, we're trying to bring as much funding here as we can to develop some of these new technologies and implement them. And yes, we're doing things like going to Israel on State Department trips and trying to bring back technology that's been actually very successful and very exciting. We've also had a lot of leadership visits from people from all over the world working in water to kind of figure out how we can share best practices. CAP is sort of an intra-state little thing, but it's such a novel system that we do get visitors from all over the world figuring out what we're doing, how we're doing it, and we do interface on a pretty international level. So like I said, long-term solutions include augmentation. Desalination is a big one. Wheeling is the one I want to talk about because it's such a new concept, but a really great concept. When the Central Arizona Project was formed, and when I say we, I mean Arizona had to get funding from the federal government to build it. We are still in repayment to the federal government. We will be until 2045, and that's just on the usual payment schedule. But because the way the federal government put it together, we could not have anything other than essentially our CAP water, our Colorado River water in the canal. However, when they built the canal, we have a capacity to hold and move about 1.8 million acre feet of water. So even at our fullest times, we've had about another 300,000 acre feet of water room left in the canal. And so what we're doing is working with other folks who might have water and want to move it throughout the state. We've actually now entered into an agreement with the federal government. We're allowed to put non-CAP water into the canal to move it throughout the state, which means that we're not going to have water marooned in parts of the state that maybe don't need it or don't need it right now, and we could put it in the canal and move it to a place that does need it. It's going to give us a ton more flexibility in the system. It took us about 25 years to actually work with this, with the feds to get it approved, but we have agreements now. A lot of it was dealing with the fact that what quality of water, what quantities of water and things like that, but we've worked through that. And I think we're going to start seeing it put into place in the next few years. And it could be a really interesting change to our system because it's giving us just a ton more flexibility to move water from point A to point B and where it's needed. Obviously, we're doing tons of conservation. Conservation has to be the key. I mean, frankly, it's in our name. We are the Water Conservation District. But we're doing fallowing partnerships. Like I said, we're doing end drip. We've been doing work lining the Brock Reservoir and seeing if there's ways to reduce losses there. We're doing tons of partnering with other basin states to look at treating wastewater for reuse. We already do a lot of that, but most of the wastewater that's treated and reused in Arizona is used for agriculture or watering. We're looking at bringing that back up to having the water treated up to drinking water usage. We're doing some of that, but really looking to expand that. Southern California does a great job. So we've been working a ton with our partners at MWD, Metropolitan Water District, on this. And then recovery. What are their ways? You know, we store a lot of water underground. One of the other things that CAP does is we work with the Arizona Water Banking Authority to store huge amounts of water underground. And we've stored lots of water. There's quite a bit stored for, quite frankly, a rainy day, or as I like to say, a non-rainy day. And how do we get that water out of the ground? How do we recover it safely and efficiently? So those are things that we're looking at as well. So I want to share these information sources, and I did send this presentation to Roxanne. If there's one slide I really want you to take home, it's this one, because there's a lot of great information out there. CAP's news site, we created a sort of sub-site called Know Your Water News. This was something that I was personally very involved in because a few years ago, when we really started hearing a lot about the shortage, I was concerned that a lot of the information we were putting out was very, very wonky. And if you were a hydrologist, it made a ton of sense. But if you were a regular person, it didn't. So we created Know Your Water News to put out really great resources for regular people who have lots of questions to answer your questions. You can also submit questions. You can read white papers. We've also got great information on there if you're teachers or if you've got kids who are interested. We've got some resources for K through 12. We also have this information in Spanish. We're working on getting it in Diné and some of the other native languages. But Know Your Water News is a great site for you to get fact sheets, information. It's really well written, really easy to understand. Of course, there's our main website as well, the centralarizonaproject.com. Arizona Water Resources has a great site, and so does the Bureau of Reclamation. So I'm going to wrap up there because I think there's going to be a lot of questions and other things to talk about. So yeah, we can do questions now. And I appreciate you holding your questions. It's just really hard when I've got the screens going to see questions. And it looks like T. McClintock has a hand up. Oh, you're on mute. I can't hear the question. Can anyone hear it? I'm sorry, they're still on mute.
Well, seeing as there's some technical difficulties going on there, if anybody else has a question, if you can use the raise hand feature and we will call on you accordingly. So we'll start with Marty and then Roger.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
First of all, I was a reporter in a small southwestern Colorado town, Ouray, Colorado. The north part of the county was ranching.
Yep.
And got to cover a lot of water rights stuff. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just an aside. Okay, but I have some questions about here. Is there a way? First, no, the biggest one that I think of is the data centers that we keep letting move in. It is my understanding they take an inordinate amount of water to keep the servers cool.
We've been working with them on that to reduce that, and they can actually reuse that water over and over again. So
okay,
they do use water, but I will tell you that we have been extremely aggressive. One of our biggest customers is Intel. When we talk about our industrial contracts, we also, when Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, they're coming in. Before they even came in, we were actually involved through that bidding process. It was all secret at the time. I can talk about it now. It was so funny because people would ask me, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm under an NDA. I cannot talk about this, but I can talk about it now. When Taiwan Semiconductor was looking at coming here, we worked with them a ton to figure out how much water they were going to need, how we could reduce that, how they could reuse and recycle it. And we learned so much from the projects we've done with Intel and with Chip. Chip is another big one here. And so we've actually reduced their water usage quite a bit.
So that work is not pretty good.
Good.
So okay. Yes, but trust me, I understand the concern. I understand.
I have several. How about swimming pools and fountains that the water just disappears into the air?
Right. So we've been really encouraging people to, fountains are a little different because most fountains, again, recycle water. They don't use a ton. And depending on the scale, there's a real difference between like the little fountain you might have in your driveway and like the one in Fountain Hills. But we've worked a lot on having people run them less, having people put them in less. Water prices have gone up, which I think is depressing some of this behavior from an economic standpoint. Swimming pools, we really encourage people to cover them.
Yes,
in the past, we've had programs, and the cities still have these programs. CAP is not funding them as much because, frankly, we've gotten some water use it wisely money that the cities are distributing, but they've been doing things to sort of subsidize pool covers and things of that nature.
Okay, good. Because it is the evaporation.
Oh yeah.
All right. Any way to improve the amount of things that car washes use?
Car washes are another business that we've really targeted and worked with. Again, there's a lot of water recycling that is done through car washes. Most of them too are also using reclaimed water to start with. I don't want to scare anyone. It's
Oh,
very
okay.
safe.
No, that's great.
Your car is clean. People,
All
I
right.
see that and
And
people are always like,
another big use that I see is reverse osmosis and all the water stores that use reverse osmosis.
I know.
And I use water stores.
Yeah, we are trying to work on that. The big problem that we have with reverse osmosis systems is that they add really high salinity content to the water.
Yes,
And
exactly.
we already have super high salinity content. The Colorado River just in general, period, has an extremely high salinity content. And so water softeners are a huge problem because they make that water
Didn't think of that one. Yeah.
extra saline, and it makes it really difficult to reuse and recycle. So we are trying to encourage people. I know it's great. Everyone loves soft water, and I totally get it. I love it too, but we are trying to get some reductions there. But I also get it because it just feels so nice.
One more. Do things like low water toilets and turning off the water while you're brushing your teeth and really watch your if enough of us did it, would that help?
It helps tremendously.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you to do it, or I'm not going to say
I'm doing it.
I'm going to say I'm going to ask you to do it. It helps tremendously.
And excuse my bringing it up, but not flushing every time you pee.
I would say that stuff helps tremendously. It really does. I will tell you what we've seen is, we have in Phoenix and in most of Arizona, and I just keep saying Phoenix, I've seen their numbers. I work with them a lot. They're one of the cities. We're all sort of assigned to work with cities, and Phoenix is one of mine. So I will say, I intimately know Phoenix and Scottsdale's numbers. So I end up mentioning them a lot and maybe more than I should. But because I know their numbers so intimately, when they passed water smart building codes, we just saw, water usage just declined tremendously, requiring low flow toilets, requiring, all these different systems. It has been tremendous. So yes, that stuff makes a difference.
And just one more quick comment. I live in an old apartment building, high water toilets, and there's no way to regulate the if you want shower water, it ends up being all the hot and all the cold, and there's no way to cut back the amount of water that comes out of
right.
And I just think.
Yeah, we are encouraging, obviously, dense communities to
and my rent just went up $109 on Social Security. So I'd like to see some results from that increase.
But yeah, I was, low flow shower heads, the low flow toilets, all of it's great. As much as you guys can do, every little bit counts. I mean, that's the thing. These are big problems, but the solutions are going to have to be incremental.
Yeah, and I can't change the toilet. They have
to. Yeah, I would not encourage that.
For low, they're really not.
Yeah.
So
we also do have Roger, and we do have some questions in the chat.
Sorry,
but we can definitely come back to this later.
Sorry, thank you.
Love the enthusiasm. Just want to make sure everybody has a chance. So moving on to
Roger, and then I'll go to the comments.
I will read those out for you. I have them all organized and set out.
Thank you.
Oh, so I had a question of maybe a couple weeks ago, there was news that the Bureau of Reclamation was sending more water to Lake Powell, but also stopping almost 500,000 feet from flowing down to Lake Mead.
Yes.
But the stories I've read didn't say what effects that would have on Lake Mead, or if we were going to take extra cuts.
So the reason the stories didn't talk about that is because it's an incredibly complicated topic. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are operated in a balancing tier against each other. So because Lake Powell was so low, the thought was to put additional water in Powell and leave it there and not make the regular outflow to Lake Mead, because Lake Mead was actually doing better at the time than expected. So it's really about balancing. There's also once a year, and it usually happens around the middle of August. So the date can move around a little bit based on weather and stuff like that. There's a major outflow from Lake Powell to Lake Mead of usually about 750,000 acre feet up to about 800,000 acre feet, depending on how the two lakes are doing. And that usually happens in mid-August because otherwise Lake Powell almost gets too full. So I think we're going to see that the thought right now is that, yeah, they didn't send the 500,000 down. It's because at the time Lake Mead was doing better than Lake Powell was. And the thought is they might just balance it out with the August regular flush. And I will tell you, I don't have an answer on that because I don't think we know exactly what the flush level is going to be at this point. But the way it was reported was a little misleading, though. Frankly, I understand why, because I would have to show you like about 9 million charts and graphs to show how they're just tell you that they're operated in balance. They're tiered and balanced against each other. That was a very normal thing to happen, not having the 500,000 come out. We actually all agreed that we needed to prop up Powell more than Mead at the time. And it will probably, frankly, come out in the wash when we do that August flush.
Oh, a second question related to that is, I'd never heard of the Flaming Gorge reservoir before.
Yep.
Do they have many more buckets of water they can send down, or
they do? I will say, and I wish I had brought my bucket chart, but if you go on our website, we have what I affectionately call the bucket chart. And the two big buckets are Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and Lake Powell. Lake Powell has a reservoir system of about six or seven other reservoirs that can either drain up or out of it. It has just a really different system. Their hydrology is very different up there, and they have a lot more reservoirs than we do. By the way, I'm loving seeing all the cats. I have 4 dogs, so I'm loving it. So they have a very different system, but yeah, so Flaming Gorge is one place that they can take from. Flaming Gorge is the most common one because it's the closest and the easiest to kind of move water into Lake Powell, but there's also other reservoirs up there.
Thank you.
And if you ever go on our website and you look for the bucket chart, it'll show you all the different reservoirs and the levels that they're all at. And we update it. It's probably updated every 2 weeks, but I usually look at the big monthly updates. If you're also interested in data, we have data on flows and all that stuff on our website. If you kind of dig into the CAP website, we have minute-to-minute updates on all of flow rates and where everything's at. It's really interesting stuff, though some of the data is a little arcane.
Thank you. I'll look for that. I enjoy the updates each day from SRP on the Salt River system in the Verde, but
yeah, we have the same, but I will tell you, it's like almost minute to minute. It gets overwhelming. So when I first joined the board, I subscribed to all of it. And then I had to kind of cut back and just get the dailies because I was like, oh my God, I'm getting like 5,000 emails a day.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm going to read through all of the questions and feel free to keep putting them in the chat. I will continue to update my list or raise your hand and we'll fit you in while I'm reading these questions. We just want to make sure everybody is heard. So we have from Stuart, I've heard that large amounts of CAP water is lost through evaporation in the canal. Is this being worked on?
So we actually lose a lot less water than you would think. And then is it being worked on? Yes. Everyone thinks that the canals are completely uncovered, and that is totally false. A good chunk of our system, especially the system outside of Phoenix, is underground. When you drive down to Tucson along I-10, you are literally paralleling the canal. That said, you won't see it because it is underground. A lot of our input from Lake Havasu down to like when you get closer into Maricopa County is underground. So we actually have a fairly small portion of the canal that is open that could be impacted by evaporation. And most of that is because it's flowing through existing cities and towns like Phoenix and Tucson. They already existed when we built the canal. So building something subterranean there would have been incredibly difficult and expensive. Also, people don't like it when we like build under their homes and their homes subside, people get mad. And so there's actually only fairly small portions of the canals that are above ground. I don't know why this misconception is out there, but it really is. And on the pieces that are above ground that you can see, the way that the canals are built, the way that they graded the concrete and a whole bunch of stuff actually reduces evaporation. So we lose a lot less lot less water through evaporation because the water is moving, because of the way that the concrete is created. I am not an engineer. I cannot explain this terribly well. We lose a lot less than if you just had, say, a puddle or a pool. In addition to that, we don't want to cover the entire canal because we need to be able to get in there to do maintenance. You know, for example, this is very unfortunate, but we had a car go into the canal. If you have a completely covered canal or a canal that's covered most of the ways, it would be incredibly difficult for us to get divers in there to get, frankly, we had to do a rescue to get people out. We also put divers into the canal pretty frequently to clean it. You know, we get algae, we get the zebra mussels. We have a lot of stuff down there that's constantly moving the water. So we also need to have a safe space where we can get our maintenance people in and out. And sometimes that requires having these fairly large open berths of canal. So, you know, we have looked at covering it with solar panels. Right now, that would just be cost prohibitive. We are the #1 largest largest user of electric power in the state of Arizona. So covering the open portions of the canals with solar panels just doesn't even put a dent in our electricity needs because we're constantly moving that water 3,000 feet uphill. And so it just doesn't end up being cost effective. And of course, we do need some open sections so that we can do maintenance safely. But I will say there's a lot less that's uncovered than people think. I think people just think it's all uncovered because when you're driving, and I do the same thing, you forget about it. When you're driving through Phoenix, you're like, it's right there. And then, but when you're actually driving through like the entire 336 miles, there's a lot less of it that's above ground.
Wonderful. From John Worm, my understanding is that Arizona has a great supply of groundwater, but that much of it is brackish. If this is true, and if so, can it be treated for salinity?
So the first answer is we do not have a great supply of groundwater. We have actually a really not great supply of groundwater. And our groundwater has been severely overpumped in the past. We actually passed the 1980 Groundwater Management Act because we were overpumping groundwater to the point where we were seeing massive subsidence in communities in Tucson. Like the ground was legitimately falling in because groundwater was being overpumped. So under the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, most of Arizona is divided up into AMAs or active management areas. In those areas we have, and they're specific to each area because each area is geographically and hydrologically different. Within each of those AMAs, we have a number called safe yield. And essentially you can pump water, but you cannot pump it below that safe yield number. I will tell you that with agriculture getting less CAP water, we're seeing more groundwater pumping. We've had tremendous concerns about those safe yield numbers, whether or not they need to be revised. So I'll be honest, groundwater is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. There is not enough. And we are really in a race right now to make sure that we do not overly deplete our groundwater and see more massive subsidence. We do have some large pockets of brackish groundwater. We've been working with the University of Texas. They've got a way to sort of bring it up, but it's incredibly expensive and there's still not huge pockets of it. Even if we were able to desalinate all of the brackish groundwater that we have, it's not going to solve the problem. So it is something we're looking at, but Arizona's groundwater supply is extremely threatened.
Wonderful, thank you. From Steve Trezise, my apologies. I read nearly everywhere I looked that 70% of water in Arizona is used by agriculture. You said only 4% of CAP water is used by agriculture. Can you reconcile those numbers?
I mean, I can. I will tell you that the 70% number is wrong. It's never been right. Even in its heyday, I mean, even in the 1940s and 50s, Arizona was probably using about 50% of its water for agriculture. You still see the 50% number a lot. I frankly never seen the 70%. That's just crazy high. And a lot of the reasons that it used to be at 50% is that we had more agriculture and fewer homes and businesses. It's frankly fallen, and it had fallen to about 35% a few years ago. As we saw more developments, we started seeing more uses on the municipal side and less in agriculture. The reason that it's 4% of CAP's allotment is because when we took our cuts this year, we took that 500,000 acre foot cut this year, almost all of that cut went to agriculture. So only about 4% of our water versus about 35% last year is going to agriculture. A lot of agricultural users also have on-river numbers. If you look at like the Yuma area, there's a lot of agriculture in Yuma. Most of those folks are on-river users. They pull directly from the Colorado River. They have grandfathered rights. But even factoring in that, I would say about total overall water supply, SRP, CAP, we're looking at about 30 to maybe 35% going to agriculture.
Cool. From Susan Sackett, we have, what about golf courses? Seems like they would use an excess of water.
You know, golf courses are another one that we've worked with really, really hard. And most golf courses that are not desert golf courses are using reclaimed water, and they actually recycle their water quite a bit. So golf courses are not as much of a threat as I think a lot of people think they are. They're still not great. We still have to be careful, and we work with them very closely. but there's a lot of reuse and recycling on golf courses. The other thing about golf courses, and this is true of frankly all green spaces, I'm going to segue, but we also have to think about the urban heat island, especially in Phoenix and Tucson and different metropolitan areas. If you have a lot of concrete and not a lot of green, you raise the temperature significantly. I mean, it's up to like 4 or 5 degrees. It can be hotter. So we do need some green spaces to balance that out. So things like golf courses, especially the ones that are closer to the urban core, actually do lower the general temperature a little bit, and they sort of counteract that urban heat island. So I always say, like, we don't want tons of golf courses. We don't want an excessive amount of golf courses, but they are using reclaimed water. They are recycling. And then we do need something to counter that urban heat island, because the last thing we want to do is have a much hotter urban core, which then ends up using a lot more water.
Seeing as Roger has his hand raised, I'm going to throw it over to him and then we'll go back to these questions. And I'm putting all the ones that you're currently typing, guys, into the flow. So don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I have a question that's probably anyway, too esoteric. Mesa, Arizona, I was just looking at their water emergency contingency plan this morning, and it left me kind of not learning anything. I might end up calling them next week, but in the news has been Scottsdale declaring a certain tier of water shortage and cutting off Rio Verde. And I looked at that and said, oh my gosh, I live in a county island near Mesa and depend on Mesa for my water. And I was looking at their system of like 5 different levels of emergency, and I was like, I couldn't tell for the life of me if they would cut off certain users.
It's not probably cutting off certain user groups. Scottsdale is a very, very, very different animal. Scottsdale actually mostly works off of its groundwater and stores most of its CAP water. Scottsdale has a very unique water system for sort of, I'm going to call it central Arizona as a whole. I mean, and it's not a bad thing. This is not a criticism of Scottsdale's plan. It's just Scottsdale is very different. They actually have an abundance of groundwater, so they use that. They store most of their CAP water. They're at the nexus of sort of where the interchange is between SRP and CAP at Granite Reef. So they just have a super different system. So I would not use Scottsdale as your comparison point, just because it's such a different water portfolio from, frankly, Phoenix or Mesa or any of the places that are right around there. It's just their system was set up differently. Some of it's because Scottsdale's super old. Scottsdale's been drawing water since like the 1860s. So it's just a very different system than the rest of Arizona. And there's nothing wrong with it. This is not a criticism. It's just not comparable in that it's a funny animal. In terms of Mesa, most cities have some type of shortage plan. I would call them. I can't speak to Mesa's plan directly. I'm familiar with the fact that they have one, but where they're at with it, I don't know, which is funny because Bart Turner from Mesa was in front of our meeting last week for about 2 hours, and I should have probably asked him, but we were grilling him on water rates. So
thank you. I'll look into that. It might be a reason to get my community to consider joining Mesa.
Yeah, and I'll tell you too, I don't know if you're familiar with Bart Turner, but he is their AMWA, Arizona Municipal Water Users Association rep. He represents Mesa. He is a wealth of knowledge. I like him a ton. Politically, we could not be more different, but he is great on water. I don't think we probably agree on anything else. But he's great on water and a wealth of information. And Arizona Municipal Water Users is another great source. If you've got questions about municipal water supplies, they've got a great website. And a lot of times your AMWA rep, which in Mesa's case, I know is Bart Turner. He's a great resource, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you in your community.
Thank you so much.
Just maybe stay on water. It's my only advice. Don't engage him on other specific topics.
Okay.
He's a super nice guy. I kid, and again, we do not meet in the middle on most things, but really pleasant guy, great on water and environmental issues.
No, that's great that people across the aisle are coming together on water.
It's the one place in Arizona that I can say that we actually do that. And when I ran for the board, oh my God, 10 years ago, that number still blows my mind. Somebody asked me the other day how long I'd been on the board, and I was like, 10, it's been 10 years. That was a little crazy. So So I've kind of grown up on this board in a way, but I will say that that's one thing I'm really proud of is that, when I ran 10 years ago, we'd seen the Tea Party get a lot of seats, and that's why I ran. I thought we needed people who were more centrist on the board and had a real understanding of environmental issues and the stewardship obligations we have towards the river. And, since that time I ran and I got on the board, which I didn't expect, I've really seen a shift and we've become a lot more centrist. And I think that's great. I think that's why we've gotten things done. I think that's why we got the drought contingency plan passed. I think that's why we're making a ton of progress on the 500 plus plan. If I have an optimism about this, it's A, that I think if you get pessimistic about this stuff, then you shut down and you're not actually working on a solution. But B, I've seen a lot more centrism lately on it. And I think that's what we need. And that gives me a lot of hope. Sorry, I know I just got on the soapbox. Sienna, I apologize.
No,
Go back to
It's okay. I was just about to be like, hey, we have a lot of questions. So
yeah, no, I'm sorry.
No worries. You're here to talk about water. We're here to listen, So from Roxanne, we have, do you collaborate with SRP and how does that affect CAP plans? What about the depletion of the underground water in Southern AZ? Which we kind of touched on, but
yeah, we work with SRP a ton. I was gonna say, and we work with MWD, Metropolitan Water, which is sort of Southern California up to Los Angeles. We work with LA Power and Light a ton. I will tell you that these are going to have to be regional solutions. So, I mean, I meet with SRP at least once a month. We often attend each other's board meetings. We work all the time. And frankly, SRP is part of our plans and we're part of their plans. And even regionally, SRP and CAP work with our regional partners, Southern Nevada Water Authority. I work with them a ton. So these are big problems that need regional solutions. And yet our local water systems probably have the best knowledge base. So there is a lot of overlap, and I'm really happy about that. We don't have as much siloing, I think, as people think. SRP is really different from us because they generate power too, which we do not. But on water issues, we work with them. And frankly, we're one of their power customers and we're one of their large power customers. So we work with them on those issues as well. Depletion of groundwater in Southern AZ is a big issue. Most of that is in an active management area like the Tucson area, but south of that, they don't have an active management area. We have been working to push the legislature to create an active management area, like a sort of a Santa Cruz and lower active management area that would essentially go from like south of Tucson to basically the border. The legislature has not wanted to do that, not shocking. And so we are trying to work to regulate groundwater in that area, but it's specifically hard because if you're outside of an active management area, we have fewer tools to regulate it.
Awesome. So from Athena, we have what is being done to get Native Americans on the board?
And I assume she means the board of directors.
I would assume so as well.
We've actually had Native Americans on the board of directors. We don't right now, but we have in the past had several Native Americans on the board representing a bunch of different tribal entities. We also interface regularly with tribal governments. We get updates from them on an almost monthly basis. We do have at CAP a tribal affairs group, I think I would call it, of about 10 people whose entire job is to interface with all of the different sovereign nations throughout Arizona. And we have had specific members of the board who are Native American as well. And then, like I said, we interface quite a bit with our Native American counterparts. And also, like when I talked about DCP and we had the DCP committee, we had tribal representation on the committee talking about the ARC, the Arizona Reconsultation Committee. It's a mouthful. We have tribal representation on those committees. We regularly have them in our stakeholder groups. So while we don't have an elected board member right now, we have in the past, we do actually have a lot of interaction with them.
Cool. From Joe Blankenship, has the low water level cut electricity generation?
Not yet. It's not low enough to do that yet. If we see Lake Mead at about 1050 or 1000, we will absolutely see cuts at the power generation at the Hoover Dam. Right now, we still have enough water in the canal because we're still at about 1.1 million acre feet where it's not impacting our generation at the new Waddell pumping plant, but that's a hydroelectric plant. So not right now, but it could happen. And that's something we're trying to not have happen by doing all these shortage measurements, but we're not there yet, but it definitely could happen.
From Jordan Foltz, how do I get a job diving in the canals?
Join CAP. Take many years of training, open water dive certifications. Typically, these are some of our engineering folks. But yeah, we have, if you go on our website, we have job openings. You can kind of work your way up. I don't know that we have one specifically for canal diver, but that definitely falls under operations and maintenance. So if you start there, you can work your way into it.
Awesome. From Athena, has there been consideration of placing solar panels over the canal, as has been done in parts of India? Has the benefit of shading the water to reduce evaporation, generating power, and increasing the panel efficiency from the water cooling the air from underneath?
So we've looked at that, and right now it just doesn't make sense from a cost or energy perspective. Like I said, covering the open portions of the canal, it's just so expensive to do that with solar panels, and they don't generate very much energy, or at least not in comparison to our incredibly large energy needs. So we've looked at it. The technology's not there yet. It's definitely something we're looking at. I will say too, covering them does impact water quality. We will see if we cover them a lot more algae growth and a lot more of the zebra mussel growth. That's very different in India. In India, what they're covering are agricultural canals. Those tend to be unlined, so they actually lose a ton of water because they're not lined, whereas our canals are completely lined. And they also tend to be, because it's agricultural water, there's a very different water quality standard. We have to maintain a very high water quality standard because, frankly, our water does go to agriculture, but the vast majority of it goes to be drinking water. So in terms of covering them, it's not cost effective. It doesn't generate enough energy, at least right now. It's still on our radar and something that maybe in a few years will catch up, but we also have to be very careful to make sure that we have open areas of the canal for our maintenance, and so that we're not actually impacting water quality.
Awesome. From Stuart, new.az.gov says irrigated agriculture is the largest user of water in Arizona, consuming about 74% of the available water supply. In the past, the percentage was as high as 90%. Reductions have been the result of both urbanization of agriculture lands and heavy investment by the irrigated agriculture industry in conservation measures from both on-farm and in delivery systems. The 4% from CAP could still be correct, ?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is like CAP, when I'm talking about CAP, like we have cut our supply to water, to agriculture because of the shortages. So our 4% is literally the only amount that we're giving to agriculture now. Like when I talk about that 4%, that's just CAP water. So we've got about 1 million acre feet of water. 4% of that goes to ag. The rest goes to tribal and municipal groups. It used to be about 35% to ag, but now that we're in that tier 1 shortage and we have to cut 500,000 acre feet, that came directly out of what I'm going to call the agricultural pool.
Awesome. So from YouTube, Suzanne Grunbaum, are we selling water to other countries in contracts for farming rights?
I mean, we're not selling water to other countries. That's actually illegal. What we are doing, and now when I say we, I do not mean CAP. But what does happen is we do have other countries come and they buy property and they grow crops on it, and they might sell those crops domestically or they might export them. In that sense, yeah, you're selling water, just like when you sell any type of crop, you're selling water, right? Like when you go to the store and you buy a tomato from Yuma, you're actually buying some water from Yuma, right? Because water produced that tomato. So in the sense that, yes, we do have some foreign countries that come in, they buy land, they farm it. Some of that product gets sold domestically. Certainly some of that goes back to whatever foreign country owns the land. In that sense, we're selling water. But frankly, that's US property rights. We don't restrict who can come and buy land, and we don't restrict, the import or export of crops.
Interesting. From Laura J, grass is a major waste of our water supply. Grass does not have the capability of storing water and does not belong in the desert. Except for parks, resorts, it should be restricted. Tax incentives should be implemented. What are your thoughts?
I don't agree with that. I don't think we need as much grass as we have, but again, dealing with this urban heat island issue, if we wipe out all the grass except for parks and resorts, it's going to get way hotter, way faster, which actually means more water usage. Also, any water that goes on the grass percolates back and it gets saved in those underground water supplies we're so worried about. Whereas any water that hits the road collects oil, it goes in a sewer. Any rain that hits the sidewalk typically doesn't percolate back. So I think grass gets a bad rap. I don't think we need as much grass as we have, but I think that eliminating grass, other than parks and resorts and places where we think it looks nice, I don't think that's the answer. We really have to think about having green spaces. We really have to think about how much we enjoy green spaces. And we have to think about the fact that even if the grass itself doesn't hold a lot of water, a lot of that water percolates back into the aquifer that way. We do actually have tax incentives or subsidies in a lot of our cities to replace grass. Scottsdale has them, Mesa has them, Phoenix has them. So in terms of tax incentives, they already exist. They just exist on the municipal level.
Thank you. From Stuart, do you have any comment on the proposed Arizona Water Authority?
I have no comments on it. I have a lot. I only have a few that I am probably publicly allowed to say. My concern about the Arizona Water Authority is the lack of transparency. Well, I have a couple, but the big one is the lack of transparency. I don't like anytime we take a subject as big and as important to every single one of us as water, and we hand it out to a special group handpicked by the governor. And I would say this even if it was a Democratic governor. Even if it was a governor I agreed with, I don't think it's smart to let the governor handpick a group of people, give them several $1 million and make them solve a problem in a closed room. I think that's a terrible idea. I'm not sure why we need this. We have the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Why not fully fund that? The Arizona Department of Water Resources has not been fully funded since the 1980s. It is only about half funded right now. They've got tons of open positions because they can't pay people and they can't hire people. I think between CAP and SRP and the Department of Water Resources, the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, and all the work we're doing, I think this is taking a lot of money away from that could be spent on compensated conservation and putting it into a closed door group of handpicked people. I just don't think it's a good solution. And I'll tell you, that is not the official CAP position. Our position is that we need more information, but I personally am not a fan. Sorry.
Thank you. From Laura J, are homeowners legally allowed to collect roof rainwater?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can put out a rain barrel. You can put in recycling systems. You can collect roof rainwater. You can collect just regular rainwater with a rain barrel. I used to have one. Totally fine. Absolutely legal here in Arizona.
Wonderful. That is all the questions that I have from the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand and ask any more questions, this is the time to get those out there. Or if you have any more questions that you'd like to be put into the chat, now is also the time to get those out there. I'll give a little bit of time, get them thinking in your brain before we go into our little wrap up.
I will say, and I'm not trying to put Roxanne on the spot, but I did give her the slides. So if you guys want the slides, she can distribute them to you. I have no problem with that. Feel free to use them. If you want to talk to other groups and stuff, all the photos in them were taken by CAP. You can totally use them. Some of the really crappy ones were taken by me personally. So no worries if you want to reuse the slides.
We got a question from Athena. Speaking of the heat island effect, are there any programs to increase the number of desert adapted trees in the Phoenix area and elsewhere?
Yes, we have huge tree planting going on in the city of Phoenix and a lot of the cities. Again, Phoenix and Scottsdale are my direct interfaces, so I know about them more acutely. But yes, we've had a lot of programs to get more trees out there into the cities. Also, if you go on both, I think AMWA has this, I know Water Use It Wisely has this, and your cities might have this. A lot of your cities, as well as AMWA, have desert landscaping classes that you can take for free to learn more about desert landscaping. Sometimes they also have free tree giveaways that you can get desert adapted trees to come and plant in your community or plant in your home. So there's a lot of this going on, and I really urge you to go to SRP's website, your city's website, AMWA's website, Water Use It Wisely, and find out more about these resources that are out there, because there's tons of things that you can do in your homes and communities that are great for this. The other thing we're looking at, and it's really interesting, I think, is different types of pavements, whether it's street pavement or sidewalk pavement. We are looking, and Phoenix is slowly implementing, frankly, we're doing some pilot programs about using different types of pavement that get less hot and that are more permeable, so that we don't have this issue of water hitting sidewalks and essentially going nowhere. So we are also experimenting with some new types of pavements to reduce the urban heat island as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. Seeing no hands raised, seeing no further questions, as we wrap up, are there any books, podcasts, radio shows, or Twitter handles that you'd like to promote? And where can people find out more information about all of this online?
So I'm going to start with your last question first. Really go to those resources on the slide. There's great information there, and it's also a good jumping off point to everything else. Know Your Water News is one that I really keep promoting because I think it's so well done. And like I said, it's got educational resources on it, which I think are great. It also has tons of information about these upcoming ARC committee meetings, which are open to the public, as well as CAP meetings. All of our monthly board meetings, as well as our committee meetings, are open to the public. They are broadcast on the internet, so you can watch them on the internet or you can attend in person. They're also recorded. And the cool thing now about the recordings, we finally got this done in the last few months, is they're now marked on the recording. So if you want to jump from one topic to the next, and maybe you don't want to listen to our 45-minute presentation on wheeling, but you do want to listen to, the Colorado River news update that we get every month, you can now jump to just that portion of the meeting. So those are great resources that are available to the public. You can watch the meetings live, listen to them after the fact. You can submit your questions and comments on blue cards. We will read them during the meeting and respond to them. I think ADWR, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, has a great website. Books, I really like Jeff Fleck. We did Water is for Fighting Over in book club a couple years ago. He just came out with an updated edition that I think is great. I love him because he does a great job of giving you information, but also not being too pessimistic. Because again, I just try not to be too pessimistic. You get pessimistic about this stuff and you shut the conversation down. So I think that's great. Trying to think podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I mostly listen to podcasts about murder because that's what I find soothing at the end of my day. So I don't really listen to a lot of water podcasts. I feel bad about that now. So if you want recommendations on murder podcasts, I have those, but I don't have a ton on water.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all that you do and for an amazing presentation and super informative and for answering all of our questions. And with that, I wish to thank everyone for coming. And remember, if you enjoyed our content, then hit the subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon, become a member of HSGP, or better yet, volunteer and make the magic happen. Be well, stay safe, and take care. Goodbye, HSGP.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.